Hey everybody, this is Josh,
And this is Dean.
and here we are again with another episode of Finding an Agent. So this week we're going to talk a little bit about what Dean's been doing. I'll kind of fill you in on what I've been doing, and then we're going to talk a little bit about what we've been reading. So I guess I'll go ahead and kick this off because I don't have quite as much. I was on vacation, and so didn't get a whole lot done. Since I've been back from vacation, I've been working on a short story. Also been continuing to research markets that I can send a short story collection to. And the good news there is that I did find one. I actually found one small publisher that is accepting unsolicited short story collections for publication. So I am working on putting that together to send to that small press. But that's about it for me for this week. Dean, what about you?
Well, for this week, I sent out another query, another one by snail mail, which I'm really getting into. Just sending it out, and, including the self-addressed stamped envelope. I'm optimistic that I will get more response in terms of not just a form rejection letter than if I send it by email or web submission. So that was my big thing this week. I've also gotten a little bit more less perfectionist about sending out to agents. Before I was getting into a book and really researching them and everything, and I just decided that for time reasons, I just get on the internet and Google agent, snail mail, and then look for agents that accept science fiction, which is what I'm querying for, and find one that meets those criteria and add them to my list and mail it out.
Okay, so you haven't really been sorting through a big list of agents.
No,
You
just because, like I said, I was finding that I was spending half a day just in getting 3 or 4 agents trying to sort through a book, and I just didn't know that that was the most effective use of my time.
Yeah. Okay. So that's interesting. So you kind of gone from, like you said, sorting through a big list to, I guess, a little bit more specific targeting on the upfront search.
Yeah, and I'm using the internet to hopefully help me by just doing searches for agents.
So yeah, but I think you'd pretty well exhausted the book
The book,
resources that
yeah, the
you're.
books, yeah, I'd pretty much gone through the books.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. And but no additional responses from any of the agent queries.
No responses.
So do you have anything planned for the coming week? What do you got going on?
I'm going to do more queries. I'm trying to get at least one query off a week, so I'll work on that. I will be working on a short story, I think, pretty soon. I've got an idea for one.
I was going to ask you on sending out the snail mail queries. I don't know if you want to talk about just what all expense is involved in that. What does it cost you to put together a package and ship it off?
Mailing, the postage is probably $2 or $3. I thought about sending it certified so I'd know it arrived, but I just decided I didn't want to spend the extra money on it. So I just sent it regular US mail with first class postage. So, with an envelope that size, and you've got, 10 pages of your book plus, the self-addressed stamped envelope and all that stuff adds up to probably a couple of bucks in postage.
No, that's not too bad.
And then, you've got a regular first class, regular first class stamp like that for, your self-addressed envelope, so they can hopefully respond to you, or, at least they get a free envelope that they can use for mailing to other people if they want.
Yeah.
But so it's not too bad. And I, like I said, I think the old fashioned way it seems to have more appeal to me. And I think maybe they'll take it better. I'm hoping that, getting something in the mail.
Yeah. So for me, for this next week, I'm going to continue to work on the short story collection for that one publisher that I found. One of the stories that's in that collection, I think I mentioned in a previous meeting that I sent it out to another small press that's doing an anthology. And so I actually pulled one story from that collection and sent it to them. And I'm waiting. I'm either going to have to replace that story with another one if it gets accepted, or if it gets rejected, then I can put it back into the collection that I'm going to be sending out. I have not heard anything back. And the deadline for submissions on that anthology is the end of this month. So I was kind of hoping to hear something. I've not heard anything on that yet. But anyway, that's kind of what I have planned for the week.
Are these all short stories you haven't published before?
That's correct. These are all short stories that are previously unpublished. As far as marketing to a press that would publish a short story collection, most of the publishers are going to say up front they want previously unpublished material. Every once in a while you can find an anthology that's accepting short story submissions, and they will accept reprints, but reprints are a pretty tough sell for the most part. And sometimes that can be a little bit aggravating, because I have some short stories that have been published, but they were published by really small or obscure markets. I can almost guarantee you nobody's ever read them, but as far as another publisher goes, they're going to see that as previously published material. So really the only thing I can do with those stories are self-publish them on my own in a collection. Like I said, it's a little bit frustrating, and it kind of makes you second guess, or at least reconsider the utility in publishing a story with an obscure market for free. And I'm not sure if I have any that have been published for free, but some of them have definitely been published for a token payment. I might have gotten $5 or $10 to publish the story, and then nobody read it. And then it's effectively permanently closed off from ever being published again because of that. And
right.
So now it's something that I think about. So I don't really send a lot of stories out to markets that don't pay, or to obscure markets that pay token payments anymore, not because I have anything against that aspect of it, but because of what it means for the life of the story after that. But that's something, that every author has to consider. You have to weigh that balance between trying to get your work out there and getting it seen by people, and, promoting yourself, versus, what I was talking about how other publishers aren't going to touch the story after that. So keep writing, I guess.
Guess so, yeah.
But anyway, so did you have anything else on that, or do we want to go ahead and talk about what we've been reading?
I don't have anything else.
Okay. Well, so what have you been reading, Dean?
All right. Well, and I've mentioned this before. I'm reading this science fiction. Not science fiction. Crime. Alfred Hitchcock's mystery magazine. I guess they do dual issues now for most of these magazines now, because this is May and June, so you're only getting one every other month. And I've read a good number of the stories now, and by far this is probably my favorite magazine at this point. Probably talked about this a little bit before. It seems like they're a little less hung up on being woke or politically correct, although there is a little bit of that in there. The other thing I noticed is several of the stories are set in kind of small towns or rural areas. There was one set in a small town in Tennessee. There was one that I'm reading right now that's somewhere in Idaho. And there was another one that's set somewhere, I think, outside of Jacksonville, Florida, where it's a murder and a alligator. What do you call it? Like an alligator show or exhibit type business, where they have a bunch of alligators.
Yeah, like a swamp tour type thing or something.
Yeah, and so there was a murder, and one of the alligators consumed the owner of the park, and then there's a big mystery about, or apparently consumed the owner of the park, and there's a big mystery behind that. But I find it interesting that the readers seem to have an interest in small towns and that sort of life, that because several of the authors write along those lines, or the authors have an interest, and obviously the readers do, because they keep putting them out. So the one about set in Tennessee is by, who was it by? It was called Scratch by Robert Mangio, Mangeot, and it's a small town sheriff with just a part-time deputy, and someone breaks into the town council member's store and steals his cash register. And so, since it was a town council member, obviously the sheriff's going to have to work extra hard to try and solve that mystery. And it's like basically the theme is kind of creating a mountain out of a molehill, because it ends up getting way out of control with the FBI coming in and everything like that. And the way that the main character, the small town sheriff, solves the problem, I thought was fairly amusing. And so, to me, it's interesting that those types of stories are popular, and I like them myself, because there's certainly something to be said for kind of living in a small town. And, I thought it'd be nice to be practicing law in a small town like that.
Yeah. Yeah. There's definitely an appeal to that. And I was going to ask you about that. I guess it provides a little bit more of like a cozy setting, maybe a little less urbanized.
Exactly. Yeah. I think that's the appeal there.
Yeah. And there's a lot of TV shows that kind of take that approach too, like Northern Exposure or.
Yeah. And there was that show about the Sheriff Longmire on Netflix.
Yeah.
It's kind of the same thing. I stopped watching that because I think it got a little too politically correct for me. And plus they had some loopholes or some, what I thought were deficiencies in the realisticness of the legal setting. Like his friend commits a murder in Colorado, and he's supposed to be extradited, and the next thing you know, he's being tried for murder in Wyoming. And I was like, what the hell? What are they talking about? He's accused of committing this murder in Colorado, and they're trying him in Wyoming. But at any rate, yeah, same thing.
Yeah. Yeah. We just started watching this show. It's an older show called Justified, and kind of a similar situation. It's about a U.S. Marshal, and he was originally working down in Florida. I mean, the whole premise of the show is he shoots a bad guy, and so they ship him out back to where he came from, which is like Podunk, Kentucky. And so
I think I remember hearing about that. Is that on Netflix?
It was originally on FX, and we're watching it on Hulu now, but it may have been on Netflix at some point. I know that show's bounced around because it came out about 10 years ago, but kind of the same type of deal. Like they purposefully removed him from a more urbanized setting and sent him out to a little small town in Kentucky.
Yeah, and people must like that, especially right now, because there was also the Jason Bateman, where he's the money launderer, and he goes from Chicago to
Ozark,
Missouri,
yeah,
some kind of thing, like a small town setting. That's part of its charm and appeal.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting because I think it maybe strips down the story and removes a lot of the distractions when you can get it out of an urban setting too.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of equate that, at least in my mind, I don't know if this is accurate, but at least in my mind, I kind of equate that to the difference between translating a novel versus translating a novella to like a movie form.
Mm-hmm.
When you translate a novel into a movie, a lot of times a lot gets lost in that translation and it doesn't turn out that well. And Stephen King's a great example of that. You can look at some of his longer works that have been translated into movies and they kind of bomb out.
Yeah, and then Stand By Me is probably one of the most popular. Shawshank Redemption, probably two of the most popular Stephen King movies.
Right. And those are both like 100-page novellas.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's kind of the same deal. You kind of strip away some of those distractions and it allows the people to get a little bit more involved with the characters and the setting. For me, what I've been reading, and I've kind of, although I don't love reading digitally, I have been reading on my Kindle. One of the things that I've been reading is a short story collection. Let's see, it's called Welcome to the Show. It's an anthology collection where all of the stories are kind of based around this theater. So I guess that's the theme for the anthology. And the reason I started reading this short story collection was it's contemporary horror, and it's always good to kind of get a feel for what's going on in the current publishing market as far as horror stories go. And second of all, that one of the markets that I was looking at submitting to, one of the editors had published a story, had written a story, and it was published in that anthology. And so I'm pretty big on trying to research the editors, or whether it's an editor or an agent, whoever I'm going to be submitting to or querying to. I like to do as much research as I can and get an idea of where that person's coming from and kind of their subjective tastes on things. And so I originally found that anthology because I wanted to read something that was written by the editor of another thing that I was submitting to kind of get a feel for what he wrote and his attitudes and things. But anyway, it's pretty interesting. It's been pretty fun, and it's also been pretty enlightening too to see like what people are writing, other people are writing right now, because I tend to fall into a rut of reading the same authors over and over again. I'll read a lot of Stephen King, or I kind of go back to the well for people that I know that I like. And while that's good, those are good writers that I think help make me a better writer. It's not always the best thing for seeing what's the current trend in the publishing industry.
Yeah, and as you get older, I think you get into that rut where you want to reread stuff that you really liked because you don't want to take a chance on someone new, I guess, or for me at least, that's because I end up like rereading an Isaac Asimov novel just because I liked him so much.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of, and even if it's a new thing, it's still somewhat of a known quantity because you know that author. And so like Stephen King, even though I don't really love a lot of his new stuff, I kind of find myself going back to reading Stephen King's new stuff. It's probably not as original or creative as a lot of the other things out there, but I know I like Stephen King's style of writing, and it's kind of that known commodity thing.
Yeah, comfort food for reading.
Yeah, that's a really good analogy. Yeah.
Well, so is that just ebook format then, that the thing you're reading?
It is for me. I'm honestly not sure if you can get that in paperback or not, but I have the Kindle Unlimited subscription, and I pay for the Kindle Unlimited on a quarterly basis. So I only pay every 3 months. And so since I'm paying for it, that's what I used on this instead of going out and buying a paperback.
Well, that's good, because that's exactly why I read a lot of the magazines, is to try and see what's currently going on.
Yeah, it's been pretty interesting. I don't know. I don't mean anything disparaging by this, but a lot of horror is fairly campy. Like, it's interesting. I don't find it particularly horrific or scary. So I don't know. It's I'm not quite sure what to make of it, but it's definitely been enlightening to read some of these stories and see what's getting published nowadays.
Well, and I don't know what it says about me, but I never found reading horror scary. I found it interesting, but it just wasn't ever particularly frightening to me.
Yeah, that's true for me as well. I've never found Stephen King to be particularly scary, but I guess what's scary from one person to the next is somewhat subjective. And things that I might find horrific might be pretty blasé to the next person, or vice versa.
Right.
But yeah, Stephen King, he's definitely got a reputation as the master of horror. But when you read his stuff, I mean, he had some early stuff. I personally, I think The Shining is what I would call the scariest book of his that I ever read. It actually had like one or two moments in it that were fairly creepy.
Mm-hmm.
But even of his early stuff, The Stand is not a horror novel. It's post-apocalyptic.
Mm-hmm.
Salem's Lot, that book, it's a vampire novel, and I don't really find that scary at all. Like you said, maybe interesting and stuff, and dark, but not particularly horrific. I don't know, and maybe some of that's because we've been desensitized over the last 40 years. And when Salem's Lot was originally written, it may have been a little bit more scary or edgy. And nowadays, compared to what's out there now, it's pretty tame. So
yeah, I know with my my dad, he would read some Stephen King when I was younger, and I think around the time The Gunslinger came out, and he read that, I remember him making mention to, I guess a kid dies in it, I think, if I recall correctly.
I've never read it.
Oh, okay. I think a kid dies in it, and I think he stopped reading Stephen King after that because he found that so disturbing. And this was probably in the mid to late '80s, and he basically said he thought of me and he couldn't handle it, and he just quit reading Stephen King after that.
I know a lot of people kind of had that with Pet Cemetery, because that happens in Pet
Yeah,
Cemetery too.
yeah, as a kid die. That's right.
Yeah.
To me, I listened to Pet Cemetery on audiobook recently, and I hadn't read the book before, and I thought it was a really good story, and I thought the issues that were being raised there were really interesting. But I don't have a kid too, so
Yeah. I have not read Pet Cemetery. I've seen both the old movie and the new movie. And I do think that the death of a child is probably one of the most horrific things that
for a parent, that's
almost,
got to be
yeah, that
gut-wrenching.
almost every parent can relate to. So,
Mhm.
yeah, I think that's probably some
Well, in
good
Cujo,
material there.
did you read Cujo?
No, not read Cujo.
Okay, well, I won't give it away, but
Well, I've seen the
there's
movie.
definitely suffering for a child there. I mean, pretty clearly.
Yeah, and some of these things, like I was a child of the '80s, and so I watched like a ton of horror. And so some of the Stephen King books that I haven't read, the reason I haven't read them is because I saw the movies.
Hmm.
And that's true for both Cujo and Pet Cemetery. It's like I'll get around to reading them at some point, but
Yeah.
having seen the movies, it's kind of lower on the priority list.
Well, same thing. I listened to Cujo on audiobook within the last 5 years and found it very interesting. I'd seen the movie, a long time ago, but the subplots and everything that were brought in, I was like, this is pretty interesting. This is, when Stephen King was Stephen King.
Yeah. Yeah, he's definitely, I don't know, he's definitely changed in his storytelling, that's for sure. But I started going back to The Gunslinger. It's interesting that you mentioned that because
And you've never read that?
I started reading it and I couldn't get through it, honestly.
Huh.
Like, I did not find it very compelling or interesting. And it blows my mind that there's like 8 or 9 books in that series now.
I only read
But
like the first 2.5, maybe.
yeah, I don't think I finished the first one. I could be wrong, but I mean, I read a pretty good chunk of it, but it just didn't hold my interest.
It, once again, I would not call it horror really at all. It was some kind of post-apocalyptic or fantasy setting. I can't even remember if it was supposed to be Earth or some other planet, or I think it was some other alternate reality or something, if I recall.
Yeah, that's one that I now Cujo and Pet Cemetery I probably will read at some point.
Those
The
are
gun,
those are worth a read.
yeah, the Gunslinger I probably won't. Just based on my past experience, I don't think there's any way I could get through that whole series. But I know there's a lot of people that really love those books too. So I guess it just depends on what appeals to you.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, there are people that found Gunslinger series very compelling. I know.
But that kind of goes back to what we were saying about Stephen King. I don't know. I mean, he's written a couple of things that I guess you could call horror, and especially in the context of the era in which they were originally written. But he's a fairly eclectic writer. I mean, he's had short stories that have won the O. Henry Award, and for literary short stories.
Yeah.
I believe it's just called the Man in Black, maybe. It's a short story from his collection called. And it's stories about a little boy that encounters the devil, and it's really good. Like it's a really good short story, and it's pretty creepy. But it's like what I would consider pretty mild as far as horror goes. Just has dark elements to it, but similar.
Go ahead.
I was going to say similar to like Joyce Carol Oates, and she wrote a story called "Where Are You Going? Where Have You Been?" that was published in the late '60s. That she gained a lot of notoriety for that story, and it's a really good short story. And it's dark and creepy and kind of borders on horror, but it still has been well received in literary circles.
Stephen King pretty much introduced me to the short story format because I bought Skeleton Crew in 1988 or 1989, somewhere around then. when I was about 13 years old. And I hadn't really read any short stories, and I wasn't really aware of magazines that, were out there. So, you could read short stories in. And so I remember especially that group of short stories very fondly.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Skeleton Crew was might have been my first introduction to Stephen King as well.
I read it just because a friend of mine mentioned it and picked it up. And that was also the first Stephen King I had read. Like, I don't think I'd read anything by Stephen King before that.
Yeah, I've always kind of found short stories to be a good gateway drug into an author. Get you a little taste and see if you like that writing and stuff, and then you can go from there.
Yeah, and I still love short stories and novelettes just because you can get through it pretty quick, and
Yeah,
I'm surprised more people don't read them.
yeah, I am too, especially nowadays with everybody is so busy and what have you. But yeah, I'm not sure about that. All right, well, so what else we got?
I think that's it for this episode.
All righty, well, good stuff, everybody. You guys have a good week, and we will catch you next time.
Everybody take care.
Sorry, I got to start over.
I don't know why that's backwards. It's really weird.
Ah, shit. All right.
We'll get better at this as we go, I guess. And
what's going into the sausage here?
There's definitely some reflection off my head. Yeah, I may end up in federal prison.